directly accountable to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. McHenry Jail is one of the places where we had the most issues with how the inmates are treated. And there's a number of groups that will go every Friday. There's actually a group of nuns that will go every Friday to offer service for the inmates who are there and deliver messages from the different families.
But these are state institutions, and the
Correct.
contract with the state.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Jesse. Could you speak more about the tactics used to bring black and brown together?
Yeah, definitely. The first thing is just having conversations, right? Because rarely did we actually see a lot of the African American and Latino leaders actually sitting in the same room, right? So the first part, and it was the trickiest part, was figuring out how to create those spaces where people felt comfortable to be in. And so what we did is, first we bounced to a few of the different churches, where one is we got a lot of the Latino community members who were used to only being in mostly Catholic churches to actually come and visit some of the Black Baptist churches, right? And actually sit through one of their, some of the different, not ceremonies, some of the different masses that they had, some of the different services, and for them to actually see, some of the gospel choirs sing. I mean, they realized that they had a lot in common, and so one was getting them to be in these different spaces and have these conversations. The second was actually through music. We actually got some of the gospel choirs and some of the more traditional bands that work in the church to start jamming together, and so we'd have these fundraisers where they'd kind of be playing off of each other, and it created this kind of new link that they had together, and made them understand there's a lot we can start doing together. And then we were really intentional about where we did door knocking, right? And we made sure that when we actually did the door knocking, we had Latinos and African Americans going together. And so when they go to even a Latino community, it'd be a Latino and African American young person working together, going door knocking. And so it created this kind of conversations that weren't had before. And then the rest was just easy, right? Because then once everybody started talking more and were friendly and understood a little bit more about each other, it became easy to be able to say, we're going to go to this town hall meeting and make sure we stand up really loud with our signs.
I noticed that Crete and Joliet are very different communities. I was wondering if you've been able to determine the criteria that CCA uses for the selection of a community.
Yeah, definitely. So we actually, as soon as we learned that CCA was looking in Illinois, we started to FOIA. We did Freedom of Information Acts to CCA and the different municipalities, and we discovered that there was one thing in common that they were looking for. It was a location that was close to Chicago. They wanted some place that was, close enough to Chicago because of the airport, the railroads. It was close to a transportation center, but it was far enough away that they didn't have to deal with the Chicago politicians, which unanimously were against, building a detention center in Chicago, in Cook County. So they were looking for a place that was close enough to Chicago where they could actually transport a bunch of the people that were coming from other states. That was the major part. And then the other is they were actually targeting communities where they thought that building a detention center would be kind of welcomed. And Joliet, they knew already had detention or prisons, so they were willing to do it there. And then Crete, because they didn't think that white middle-class folks would be against building a detention center.
I'm not in favor of building a new jail here in Champaign County, certainly. But I wanted to know how, or if you could speak a little more about how, if our sheriff has opted out of the ICE detainee system, for gathering up people, how our jail could be used for that, so that I can inform other people.
Well, so what we're still trying to get a sense of is how and whether or not the sheriff is still complying with secure communities. From what we've heard so far is that he's actually stopped completely telling his officers that you can actually pick up for that. What we do know is going to happen is that if they do build this new facility, and already we know that there are some undocumented folks who are housed there temporarily. So even if, local law enforcement isn't participating with secure communities, if they were to pick somebody up who had maybe a DUI or something like that and you're undocumented, you're undoubtedly going to be put in the county jail. And that triggers the process for deportation. Yeah.
Maybe this is like a silly question, but can you explain a little more about the for-profit side of it? Like why it's 95% should be filled? Is it that the tax dollars would be going to funding it, or how is that? How are they getting so much money because they're so full?
Yeah, so they actually get paid by, it's actually tax dollars, it's our tax money, unfortunately. But what happens is ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, thinks that it's actually more cost effective and it makes their job easier to use a private group to house and detain the immigrants. So they'll actually pay, sometimes it's $150 a day for an inmate to be locked up. So we're essentially paying this company to do the work of the federal government. And how much we actually pay each company is different, and it depends on what state they're in and all that, but essentially they get paid each day for having a certain amount of inmates. And what CCA does with the contract with the local municipality, it says, we want you to be at 90% because we're bringing you jobs, but essentially, we need to turn a profit off of this. So you need to keep it at that percentage. And then all of a sudden, it actually becomes a burden on the state to try and figure out how are we actually filling that. So the case that was presented earlier, actually in Colorado, what happened is, a lot of the crime rate went down, and they actually shifted inmates that would have gone to publicly run prisons to a privately run because they had to keep up with the contract. And I can give you more resources afterwards so you can take a look at it because it's really interesting.
Hi, thank you so much. It was so very inspiring. Connected to this last question, I was wondering how much lobby groups have to do with inducing basically ICE and other governmental agencies to basically delegate these jobs to private sectors, because we see this happening in our school systems, and we see always these lobbyists behind it is not, and then we know that there is there is a revolving door, of course, they are government officials and then they go and work for these private companies, so just everyone is in bed with each other.
It's a good question, and it's a really hard thing to track, right? Because we don't know a lot of the conversations that happen. We do know that, the amount of lobbying that is done is a huge amount of money that they actually put into it. And one of the interesting things that came up is we were actually getting letters of support against the detention center when we were doing the Joliet campaign. And we tried to get a letter from Senator Dick Durbin to actually come out and say, I don't believe in for-profit detention centers in Illinois. And he wouldn't, and we couldn't really figure out why it was. And it turns out that CCA actually gives him a bit of money during each one of his campaigns. So I can't give you an exact response to how many, how the lobbyists do talk to him, but we know that it's very, very connected, right? And from the video we saw that, the lobby groups are really closely tied with how legislation actually gets put forward and talk to legislators.
Thank you all very much for being here. Don't forget to pick up your tickets on the way out if you want to reserve your spot for Angela Davis, but get here early enough to get your seat.